Hey guys, tonight we're going on a journey far, far away, not just in distance, but in time. Imagine you're on a hot air balloon, and instead of just floating above the world, you're also traveling backward through the centuries. The modern world shrinks below you, the skyscrapers turning to sand, the highways becoming faint trails, and the familiar sounds of city life giving way to the lowing of cattle and the gentle lapping of a great river. As you descend, the air grows thick and heavy, carrying the scent of dust, roasting meat, and something less pleasant. You see mud brick houses, vast fields of wheat, and the unmistakable, colossal shapes of pyramids in the distance. The year is no longer your own, it's a few thousand years before the Common Era. You've just landed in ancient Egypt, and let me tell you, you probably wouldn't survive a single day here. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You open your eyes. The sun beats down with a fierce, unrelenting intensity you've never felt before. It's not just warm, it's an all-encompassing, smothering heat that makes the air shimmer. You're standing on a dirt path, surrounded by a low wall of mud bricks. A few chickens peck at the ground nearby. Your clothes, the modern, breathable fabrics you're used to, feel completely wrong. They're too heavy, too restrictive. You're sweating in places you didn't know you could sweat, and a fine layer of dust has already settled on your skin, mixing with the perspiration to form a gritty paste. You can feel the first stirrings of a headache, the result of a sun that seems determined to scorch the very ground you stand on. This is your body's first major protest, and it's a preview of the many struggles to come. Your skin, unaccustomed to such a constant barrage of direct sunlight, is probably already turning red. Sunburn, as we know it, was a constant threat. Most Egyptians, especially the laborers, had to spend their days exposed to the elements. The elite and those who could afford it might have had simple parasols, but for the average person, the sun was just a fact of life. They used oils and perfumes, sure, but not for sun protection. A quirky fact, some historians believe the dark kohl eyeliner both men and women wore served a purpose beyond just beauty. It might have helped reduce sun glare, much like the dark paint football players put under their eyes today. Who knew a smoky eye could be a survival hack? You look down at your feet. Sandals, if you're lucky enough to have them, are thin and offer little protection from the rough, uneven ground. The dirt path is littered with things you'd rather not think about: animal droppings, discarded bones, and other unmentionable bits of refuse. No modern sewage system exists here. Waste is a part of the landscape. And as you take a step, a tiny shard of pottery digs into the bottom of your foot. No big deal, right? A splinter, a tiny cut. But in a world without antibiotics, something so small could become a life-threatening infection. Historians still argue whether the ancient Egyptians had a true understanding of the link between sanitation and disease, but what's clear is that the dangers were everywhere. From the water you drank to the ground you walked on, the air smells of dust, yes, but also of something a little more pungent. It's a mix of body odor and a specific, earthy scent from the mud and straw bricks of the houses. You realize you haven't taken a proper shower in days, maybe weeks. Clean water, especially for bathing, wasn't a tap away. It had to be fetched from the Nile, often miles away, and carried in heavy clay jars. People would wash themselves in the river, but that's a whole other risk we'll get to later. The point is, the simple pleasure of a hot, clean shower is a luxury you'd be dreaming of. You'd have to get used to the constant grime and the fact that most people around you, by modern standards, would probably smell not great. You feel a fly land on your arm and another buzz around your face. They're a constant presence. Attracted to the refuse and the lack of sanitation, it's a reminder that this world is not just hot and dusty, but also very, very dirty. You're starting to get the picture. Your modern body, so used to sterile environments and quick fixes, is already screaming for a time machine. You trudge along the dusty path, the sun a hammer on your skull. Your body, already protesting the heat, is about to face its next challenge: the complete lack of modern hygiene. The sweat that started as a minor inconvenience is now a full-body experience. It's mixing with the fine silt under your feet and the animal droppings on the ground to create a pungent cloud that follows you everywhere. You swat at a persistent fly, and a low-grade feeling of disgust begins to settle in. This isn't just about feeling a little grimy, it's about a world where the concept of germ theory is millennia away. Most people here, you notice, don't seem to mind. They're born into this reality. Bathing is a practical affair, usually done in the Nile itself. You see children splashing in the shallows and women washing clothes. It looks refreshing, a brief respite from the heat, but you know better. The Nile, while the source of all life in this land, is also a cesspool of bacteria, parasites, and who knows what else. A delightful tidbit, bilharzia, a parasitic worm, was incredibly common. It would enter the body through the skin and live in your bloodstream, causing a variety of debilitating symptoms. That refreshing dip could be a one-way ticket to a lifetime of illness. No thanks. You'll take the dry heat. You stumble past a small dwelling, and a wave of a very different, but equally potent, smell hits you. It's the scent of stale air, unwashed bodies, and the cooking fire. The homes are small and crowded, with little ventilation. The families living inside would probably never have the concept of a deep clean. Floors are dirt, furniture is sparse, and everything is coated in a layer of grime. You can almost feel the microbes clinging to every surface. A mainstream historical fact, ancient Egyptians were actually quite fastidious by ancient standards. They would shave their heads to avoid lice and other parasites, and both men and women used oils and perfumes to mask body odors. So they weren't just walking around in a cloud of stink for the fun of it, they were doing their best with what they had. It just wasn't very effective by our standards. And then there's the oral hygiene. You catch a glimpse of someone's smile, and it's not a pretty sight. Their teeth are worn down, sometimes to the gum line, and you can see the telltale signs of abscesses and gum disease. The culprit? Bread. The staple food of the ancient Egyptian diet was bread made from emmer wheat. The problem was the milling process. They ground the grain on stone slabs, and bits of the stone would inevitably get mixed into the flour. So every time you took a bite of bread, you were essentially chewing on sand and stone. The abrasive grit would slowly but surely grind down your teeth, leaving them vulnerable to decay and infection. Ouch. Historians still argue whether the high rates of tooth decay and abscesses were a leading cause of death, but it's safe to say your perfect smile would be a thing of the past here. The ancient Egyptians did have some dental tools, and they could even perform some basic extractions. But it was a far cry from a modern dental checkup. The thought of that gritty bread, which is likely a big part of your immediate future, makes you wince. Your stomach, already feeling a bit queasy from the heat and the smells, begins to rumble. You haven't eaten, and the thought of trying to find something here that wouldn't make you sick is a new, unsettling worry. You know that food and water are going to be your next major hurdles. The unsanitary conditions aren't just an inconvenience, they are a constant, quiet threat to your health. A threat that modern medicine has all but erased for us. It's not just a different world, it's a world that is actively trying to make you sick. A funny thought pops into your head. You'd better hope they have a good version of Tums, because your stomach is not going to be happy with its new diet. This is a very different kind of all-natural eating, and it's not looking good for you. Your stomach rumbles again. A more insistent, low-pitched growl this time. The smell of baking bread drifts on the dusty breeze, and you find yourself drawn to it despite your better judgment. Food. You need it. You follow the scent to a small, open-air stall where a woman is shaping dough and placing it on a hot stone. The bread she's making is a dense, flat loaf, and you can see specks of what looks like sand. Yep, that's the grit you heard about. The woman's hands are moving with practiced ease, but you notice a few flies buzzing around the dough and landing on her hands. You cringe internally. This is the famous ancient Egyptian bread, the cornerstone of their diet. It was often made from emmer wheat, and as you saw, it was full of sand and grit from the stone grinding process. This wasn't a minor inconvenience, it was a major health issue. The constant chewing on this gritty bread led to severely worn-down teeth and a host of dental problems that are shockingly evident in ancient mummies. You'd have to get used to the thought that every meal is slowly chipping away at your teeth. It's a very unappealing, very slow-motion dental disaster. A light joke, you'd better start thinking about your retirement plan now, because your teeth certainly aren't going to make it. You buy a loaf with some simple copper coins you somehow now possess. The bread is heavy and dry, and it tastes vaguely of dust and wheat. You wash it down with a swig of water from a small clay jar. The water is warm, slightly murky, and you can only pray it was drawn from a clean part of the Nile. The ancient Egyptians didn't have the luxury of bottled water or purification tablets, so they took their chances with every sip. This is why beer was so popular. The fermentation process killed some of the bacteria in the water, making it a safer, if not completely sterile, alternative to plain water. So, while you might think of beer as a party drink, here it was more of a health choice. A quirky fact: ancient Egyptian beer was thick, almost like a porridge, and was a key source of calories and nutrients for laborers. You'd have to drink it through a strainer to avoid the leftover bits of grain. Your stomach gives another protest, but this time it's not from hunger. The gritty bread and the lukewarm, dubious water are a 1-2 punch to your modern digestive system. You can feel the first stirrings of discomfort, the kind that lets you know things are not going well inside. Remember that you've also likely eaten some of the flies that landed on your food and some of the filth that's everywhere. Your gut microbiome, which is used to a world of pasteurized milk and processed foods, is having an epic battle with ancient bacteria. You're definitely losing. A mainstream historical fact: ancient Egyptians had a variety of medical texts that detailed digestive issues, suggesting they were a very common problem. So you're not alone in your suffering, which is a small comfort, but not much. You also notice the diet lacks a lot of what you're used to. There are some vegetables, onions, garlic, lettuce, and some fruit. But meat is a luxury, unless you're a pharaoh or very wealthy. You're not getting a juicy steak. You'd be lucky to get a tough piece of goat meat or a fish from the river, and there's no refrigeration, so everything has to be eaten quickly or preserved with salt. This is a very different world from the one with endless aisles of groceries and guaranteed food safety. Historians still argue whether the average ancient Egyptian was malnourished, but it's clear that their diet was far simpler and less varied than ours, and a whole lot more dangerous. You're starting to realize that surviving here is less about heroic deeds and more about just making it through a single, very uncomfortable meal. Your unsettling meal is interrupted by a commotion. A procession is moving down the street, and a group of guards in crisp, white linen tunics are clearing the way, shouting at people to bow down. This isn't a normal parade, it's a show of power. The air is thick with a different kind of tension now, not just the heat, but the palpable fear and reverence of the crowd. You watch as a magnificent chariot, drawn by 2 horses with plumes on their heads, comes into view. In it, seated regally, is the pharaoh. His name is probably something you can't pronounce, but his authority is unmistakable. He wears the double crown of Upper and Lower Egypt and holds a crook and flail, the symbols of his power. His face is impassive, and you get the immediate sense that his life is a world away from yours. You, a visitor from the future, are suddenly a part of this ancient ritual. One of the guards spots you, standing tall and gawking, and shouts at you to kneel. You have to make a split-second decision. Do you defy the command and risk a swift, brutal punishment, or do you humble yourself and conform? You wisely drop to one knee, bowing your head. The pharaoh glides past, a living god on earth. This is your first face-to-face encounter with the ultimate authority in ancient Egypt, and it's a stark reminder of the rigid social structure you've been dropped into. A mainstream historical fact: the pharaoh was considered a divine being, the son of the sun god Ra. His word was law, and he owned all the land, resources, and people in Egypt. To disobey him was not just a crime, it was a sacrilege. This is why the etiquette was so strict. To even look the pharaoh directly in the eye was a massive breach of protocol, reserved for a very select few. You would have been expected to grovel and avert your gaze, making yourself as small and insignificant as possible. To you, it's an awkward act of submission. To them, it's just the way the world works. The pharaoh's procession continues, and you're left to stand back up, your knee aching from the rough ground. The crowd disperses, and life returns to its normal, grimy rhythm. But the experience has left you with a new understanding of your place. You're at the very bottom of the social ladder. Above you are priests, scribes, soldiers, and artisans. At the very top is the pharaoh, and just below him, his vizier, the chief minister who handled the day-to-day bureaucracy. You also notice something else. People are quick to avert their eyes when a powerful person walks by. They've learned that drawing attention to themselves is a bad idea. A light joke: you've officially traded your main character energy for background peasant status. A quirky fact: The pharaoh's power was so absolute that when he died, some of his possessions, and sometimes even his servants, were buried with him. The earliest pharaohs had a practice of sacrificing servants to accompany them in the afterlife. Thankfully, by the time of the New Kingdom, this had largely been replaced by symbolic statues, so your odds of ending up in a tomb are a lot lower, which is a good thing. Historians still argue whether these human sacrifices were a widespread and accepted practice or a rare, early tradition that was quickly abandoned. But the very idea of it shows the immense power and godlike status the pharaoh held. You're starting to see that your rights and freedoms are concepts that don't exist here. Your life is dictated by a social order that is as unyielding as the stone of the pyramids. You've just seen the ruler of your new world, and it's a sobering reality check. After the pharaoh's procession passes, you turn your attention to the source of all life in this land, the Nile. It's a vast, powerful river that snakes its way through the landscape. You can see boats with large, rectangular sails gliding along its surface, and a few people are fishing with nets from the banks. The water looks murky and brown, a stark contrast to the brilliant blue of a modern ocean or lake, but its importance is undeniable. You know from your history classes that this river is everything to the ancient Egyptians. It's their highway, their source of food, and the lifeblood of their agriculture. Without it, this entire civilization would be nothing but desert. You walk toward the bank, drawn by a primal thirst. The water looks so cool and inviting, a perfect antidote to the oppressive heat. But you hesitate, remembering what you learned about the parasites. Your rational mind is screaming, "Stay away, the dangers are invisible," and the basic instincts you rely on are now actively working against your survival. Historians still argue whether the ancient Egyptians fully understood the health risks of the Nile, but it's clear from their medical texts that they were plagued by stomach ailments and other diseases that likely came from the water. They knew the river could make you sick, even if they didn't know the exact cause. And it's not just the microscopic dangers. As you get closer to the water's edge, you notice a ripple in the calm surface. Something is moving just below the waterline. It's a crocodile. Its back a series of dark, bumpy ridges. The crocodile is a perfect predator, and the Nile is its home. A quirky fact: while crocodiles were a deadly threat, they were also sometimes revered as sacred animals. The god Sobek, often depicted with the head of a crocodile, was worshipped in some cities, like the ancient city of Crocodilopolis. The Egyptians had a very complex relationship with the creatures of the Nile. They feared them, but also respected their power and built a pantheon of gods and goddesses around them. You, however, have no such complex feelings. You just want to get away from the big, toothy reptile. You back away from the bank, your thirst temporarily forgotten. The river is a living, breathing thing, full of life and full of death. It provides, but it also takes. You watch as a small boy is sent to fetch water in a clay jar. He is cautious, but not fearful. He seems to understand the delicate dance required to coexist with the dangers. He quickly dips the jar into a part of the river that seems a bit calmer, and he's gone before you can even register the swiftness of his movements. It's a mainstream historical fact that the ancient Egyptians had to be incredibly resourceful and brave to survive. They built their entire lives around a river that could, at any moment, end it. Remember that crocodile dung sunscreen? Well, that was just one example of the creative, and often gross, remedies people had to come up with. The dangers of the Nile were another. You're starting to see that every single aspect of ancient Egyptian life, from what you ate to where you got your water, was a constant negotiation with the very real possibility of injury, illness, or death. The river is beautiful, yes, but it is also a powerful and unforgiving mistress. You decide you'll find another way to get a drink, a safer way, even if it means walking for miles. Your survival instincts, as clumsy as they are in this new world, are finally starting to kick in. With the Nile's dangers fresh in your mind, you turn away from the riverbank and head toward what seems to be the center of a town. The dirt paths you were on before now give way to narrower, more crowded streets. This is a very different kind of chaos than you're used to. It's not the organized, humming bustle of a modern city. It's a swirling, noisy mess of people, animals, and commerce. The air is thick with the smells of baking bread, roasting meat, human sweat, and a certain undefinable funk that is the hallmark of ancient urban life. You have to be constantly on your toes, weaving and dodging your way through the throng. A man carrying a huge bundle of papyrus scrolls on his head almost knocks you over. A donkey, laden with two overflowing baskets, brays loudly and pushes past you, forcing you to step into a pile of something you'd rather not identify. Children run barefoot through the crowds, laughing and playing a game of tag. You hear the rhythmic clanging of a metalsmith and the shouts of vendors hawking their wares. This is Thebes, or maybe Memphis, or some other ancient city, a vibrant, overwhelming tapestry of life, and every single person, every single animal, seems to know exactly where they're going. Except for you. A mainstream historical fact, ancient Egyptian cities were not planned out with wide streets and city blocks like we know today. They were organic. Sprawling messes of narrow alleys and winding paths that were built as needed. This made them incredibly difficult to navigate if you weren't a local. A light joke, you've just discovered the original no GPS era, and let me tell you, it's not a fun experience. You're constantly getting lost, and everyone else seems to be moving with a purpose you can't fathom. As you walk, you notice the houses are all made of mud brick, stacked closely together. The roofs are flat, and sometimes you see people up there, escaping the heat and socializing with their neighbors. The walls of the buildings are a simple, earthy color, but a few have bright paintings on them, depicting scenes of daily life, gods, or pharaohs. A quirky tidbit, the ancient Egyptians were masters of trompe-l'oeil, a painting technique that creates an optical illusion of depth. They would paint false doors on the walls of their houses and tombs, believing these doors were a passageway to the afterlife. It was a very practical use of art. Combining decoration with spiritual belief, you finally find a small square, a slightly more open area where people are sitting and talking. You find a spot to sit down. Exhausted from the sensory overload and the constant need to watch your step, you watch a group of men playing a board game, a simple but engaging diversion. They are laughing and talking, a moment of peace in the middle of all the chaos. It's a good reminder that despite all the hardships and the dangers, life in ancient Egypt was still full of moments of joy and camaraderie. Historians still argue whether the ancient Egyptians were, on the whole, a happy people. Their art and writing suggest a strong appreciation for life and a belief in an even better afterlife. But the daily reality was a constant struggle. You can't help but wonder how they balanced the two. You've just had a taste of what daily life is like on the ground, and it's a powerful, overwhelming experience. You've navigated the streets, but you're still a long way from home. As you take a moment to rest and observe the bustling square, you begin to grasp the sheer scale of the social hierarchy here. It's not just about the pharaoh and his divine authority. It's a detailed, multi-layered system that touches every single person. You see a man wearing a clean, high-quality linen garment, a clear sign of his wealth and status. He is speaking with a man in a much simpler, dirtier tunic, who is deferentially bowing his head as he speaks. The class divide is stark and immediately visible in the quality of clothing, the way people carry themselves, and the deference shown to those in power. A mainstream historical fact, ancient Egyptian society was often depicted as a pyramid, with the pharaoh at the very top. Below him were the vizier and high priests. Below them were scribes and other officials. Then came the artisans, craftsmen, and soldiers. At the very bottom were the farmers and unskilled laborers, and below all of them were the slaves. Your position in this world is somewhere in that bottom tier, and you're starting to feel the weight of that. The opportunities for social mobility were extremely limited. You were, for the most part, born into your station, and you would die in it. A quirky fact, while the social structure was rigid, there were some exceptions. Scribes, for example, could rise in the ranks if they were exceptionally skilled. Literacy was the key to power, and we'll get to that later, but it was one of the few ways to move up. A light joke, you'd better start practicing your hieroglyphs now, because it's your only ticket out of this mud, brick and sand life. You also notice the presence of slaves. They are working in the background, carrying water, sweeping the ground, and performing other menial tasks. Their clothes are simple, their heads are often shaved, and they move with a quiet, resigned efficiency. Historians still argue whether slavery in ancient Egypt was as brutal as it was in other civilizations. It's clear from records that many slaves were prisoners of war or people who sold themselves into servitude to pay off a debt. They had some legal rights, like the right to own property and even marry a free person, but their lives were still incredibly difficult, and they were, for all intents and purposes, considered property. This is a very different kind of freedom than you're used to, a reminder that the basic human rights you take for granted are a modern invention. As you sit there, you start to feel a sense of powerlessness. You don't have a name here, you don't have a family, and you don't have a specific skill that would make you valuable. You are, in essence, a ghost in this society, and your only real purpose is to survive. You see a small boy get scolded for a minor mistake, and the punishment is a harsh smack on the head. You also notice that the police force, called the Medjay, are not to be trifled with. They are often depicted as fierce and unforgiving, and they are here to enforce the pharaoh's law, not to protect the common person. The legal system is complex and often arbitrary, and you know you'd have very little recourse if you were accused of a crime. This rigid social structure is the foundation of ancient Egypt. It's the reason the pyramids were built, the reason the pharaohs had so much power, and the reason that every person had a specific, and often thankless, role to play. You're a tiny cog in an enormous, unforgiving machine, and the sooner you accept that, the better your chances of survival. You've just had a very uncomfortable lesson in power dynamics, and it's a lesson that will stay with you for the rest of your time here. The sun is still high, and your current tunic, the one from your first day here, is now stained with sweat and dust, clinging uncomfortably to your skin. You feel a distinct need for a change of clothes, and it turns out that's a pretty easy fix in this society. You are handed a simple, white linen tunic, a single piece of fabric draped and tied around your body. It feels light, airy, and 100 times more comfortable than what you were wearing before. This is the standard garment for most people in ancient Egypt, from the highest-ranking officials to the lowliest laborers, and there's a very good reason for that. A mainstream historical fact, linen was the fabric of choice because it was made from the flax plant, which grew in abundance along the banks of the Nile. It's a very breathable material, perfect for the relentless heat of the Egyptian climate. It's also relatively easy to clean and dries quickly. Cotton and silk were unknown here. Wool was considered unclean and was usually reserved for blankets or other non-clothing items. You'd be wearing this simple linen tunic for the rest of your stay, and you'd be very grateful for its practicality. You're also starting to notice that everyone, regardless of their station, seems to wear this material, though the quality and fineness of the weave can vary dramatically. A pharaoh's linen might be so finely woven that it's almost transparent, while a labourer's is thick and coarse. A light joke, you've just discovered the original athleisure wear, and it's all natural and organic. A quirky fact, while the tunic was the standard, many people, especially labourers, often worked in just a simple loincloth. It was the most practical attire for a hard day's work in the scorching sun. The elite, on the other hand, would often wear several layers of finely pleated linen, draped and held in place by belts and intricate jewellery. Both men and women wore these garments, though women's tunics often covered more of the body and were sometimes held up by straps over the shoulders. You'd also see people wearing elaborate wigs made of human hair or vegetable fibres. These weren't just for fashion, they also served a practical purpose, helping to protect the scalp from the sun. The ancient Egyptians were a very vain people, and their cosmetics and hairstyles were a big part of their culture. As you get used to your new outfit, you also notice the lack of footwear. Most people are either barefoot or wearing simple leather sandals. The ground is hot and rough, and you have to get used to the feel of it under your feet. The sandals offer some protection, but they don't do much for the sharp stones and other refuse that litters the streets. You remember that small piece of pottery you stepped on earlier. It's a constant reminder of the fragility of your body in this world. Historians still argue whether the ancient Egyptians had a true understanding of fashion in the modern sense. Was it just about practicality and status, or did they have a more nuanced appreciation for aesthetics? Their art certainly suggests they valued beauty, and the elaborate wigs, makeup, and jewellery all point to a culture that cared deeply about how they presented themselves. But it was a beauty that was always tied to practicality and a deep sense of social order. You're not just wearing a tunic, you're wearing a uniform that signals your place in this society. It's a powerful, subtle piece of communication that you're just now starting to decode. You've gotten your first real piece of gear for your survival journey, and it's a simple, but profound step in your integration into this new, strange world. As you adjust to the feel of your simple linen tunic, your attention is drawn to a small, enclosed building you've just passed. Through an open doorway, you can see a man sitting cross-legged on the floor, a long piece of papyrus spread out before him. He is meticulously painting small, intricate symbols onto the roll with a reed pen. This is a scribe, and he is one of the most powerful and important people in ancient Egyptian society, a walking repository of knowledge and bureaucracy. A mainstream historical fact, scribes were the guardians of written language, and their skill was absolutely essential for the functioning of the state. They were responsible for everything from keeping meticulous records of the pharaoh's grain supplies to writing letters, composing legal documents, and transcribing religious texts. Literacy was not widespread. In fact, only a tiny percentage of the population could read or write. This made scribes a powerful elite because they controlled the flow of information. You can see this power in the way people interact with this man. They are respectful, almost deferential, and they wait patiently for him to finish his work before approaching him. A light joke, they're basically the original IT department, and you definitely don't want to mess with them. The scribe's tools are simple but effective: a reed pen, a palette with black and red ink, and a small pot of water to dilute the ink. The papyrus scroll itself is a marvel of ancient technology. A quirky fact, papyrus was made from the stalk of the papyrus plant, which grew in the marshes of the Nile. The outer layers were peeled away, and the inner pith was sliced into thin strips. These strips were then layered perpendicularly, pressed, and dried to create a smooth, durable writing surface. It was a time-consuming and labor-intensive process, which is why a scroll was so valuable. A single scroll could hold a massive amount of information and was a symbol of knowledge and wealth. You watch as the scribe dips his pen into the ink and makes another precise mark. The language he's writing, hieroglyphs, is a complex system of pictures and symbols. It's beautiful to look at, but you know from your modern knowledge that it's incredibly difficult to learn. Historians still argue whether hieroglyphs were a spoken language or primarily a symbolic one used for religious and monumental purposes. What's clear is that there were several forms of writing, with a more cursive script called hieratic used for everyday purposes. This is why the ability to read and write was such a specialized skill. It took years of dedicated study, and it was a direct path to a comfortable life, a life free from the back-breaking labor of the fields or the dangers of the army. You are starting to realize that your lack of literacy is a major handicap. You can't read the signs on the buildings, you can't understand the legal documents, and you can't even begin to comprehend the religious texts that govern this society. You are a deaf mute in a world of complex and powerful ideas. Your modern knowledge of history is a useless map in a world where the streets are constantly shifting and the signs are indecipherable. The scribe, with his simple tools and his immense knowledge, is a king in his own small world. And you are a powerless observer. It's a humbling and very uncomfortable realization. The scribe finishes his work and carefully rolls up the papyrus, securing it with a small cord. You continue your walk through the crowded streets, your mind still buzzing with the realization of your own powerlessness. But then you notice something else. Something that seems to be everywhere you look: cats. They're slinking through the alleys, sunning themselves on rooftops, and even sitting regally in doorways, looking for all the world like they own the place, which, in a way, they do. A mainstream historical fact: cats held a special and sacred status in ancient Egypt. They were revered and protected, seen as physical representations of the goddess Bastet, a goddess of protection, fertility, and home. The Egyptians appreciated cats for their ability to hunt and kill pests like snakes and rodents, which protected their grain stores. But their reverence went far beyond simple practicality. To injure or kill a cat, even by accident, was considered a severe crime and could be punished with death. A light joke: you've never met a cat with a more serious sense of self-importance. And for once, it's not misplaced. You see a child drop a piece of bread, and a stray cat immediately pounces on it. The child doesn't try to shoo the cat away. In fact, he looks at it with a kind of gentle reverence, as if he's just witnessed a minor miracle. A quirky tidbit: when a family cat died, the family would go into mourning. They would shave their eyebrows as a sign of grief and would often mummify the cat and bury it with ceremonial honors. The extent of this devotion is truly remarkable. Archaeologists have found massive cat cemeteries, like the one at the city of Bubastis, where thousands of mummified cats were buried in honor of Bastet. And it wasn't just cats. Other animals also held significant symbolic and religious importance. The Nile crocodile, which we talked about earlier, was associated with the god Sobek. Falcons were associated with Horus, the sky god and protector of the pharaohs. The scarab beetle was a symbol of rebirth, and the sun god Ra. The ancient Egyptians saw the divine in the animal kingdom, and they built an entire religious system around these beliefs. This is a very different worldview from the one you're used to, where animals are often just pets, food, or pests. Here, they are a fundamental part of the spiritual and cultural landscape. You watch as a priest, carrying a small statue of the goddess Bastet, walks through the square. People bow their heads as he passes, a testament to the immense power of these beliefs. Historians still argue whether the ancient Egyptians truly believed these animals were gods themselves, or if they were simply symbolic representations. What's clear is that the line between the sacred and the profane was much blurrier than it is today. You wouldn't think twice about swatting a fly or shooing away a cat, but here, those simple actions could have serious consequences. You're starting to realize that your actions, no matter how small, could have massive religious and social ramifications. Your modern mind, so used to a clear separation of church and state, is struggling to comprehend a world where a cat is not just a cat. The quiet reverence for the animals in the square is a stark contrast to the scene you are now approaching. In the distance, rising like an artificial mountain from the desert, is a pyramid. But it's not the finished, magnificent structure you see in history books. This one is a construction site, a bustling hive of activity with thousands of men moving about like ants. You can hear the rhythmic clang of hammers on stone and the low, collective grunts of men heaving huge blocks. This is a very different image from the one you have in your head. A mainstream historical fact, the pyramids were not built by slaves, as Hollywood has so often portrayed. They were built by a massive workforce of skilled craftsmen and laborers. These were free men who were paid in food, beer, and other supplies, and they were organized into highly efficient teams. The workforce included stonemasons, carpenters, and even artists who decorated the inner chambers. A quirky fact, they were often organized into groups with names like the Drunks of Menkora or the Friends of Khufu. It's hard to imagine a modern construction company having such a casual name, but it speaks to a sense of camaraderie and identity among the workers. A light joke, they probably had a better company party than most places do today. As you get closer, you see the sheer scale of the operation. Men are using simple tools, copper chisels, wooden mallets, and ropes to work the huge blocks of limestone. They are dragging these stones on sledges, which slide on a wet, lubricated path. It's a testament to brute force and simple mechanics, but it's also incredibly clever. Historians still argue whether the ramps used to lift the blocks were straight or spiral. What's clear is that the entire process required an immense amount of planning, logistics, and engineering skill. It wasn't a chaotic free-for-all, it was a well-oiled machine run by intelligent people. You also see the living conditions of the workers. They are housed in barracks right near the site, a simple city built just for them. They have bakeries, medical facilities, and even cemeteries. The men were well fed and cared for, at least by ancient standards. Their skeletons, when found by archaeologists, show signs of hard physical labor, but also good nutrition. The pyramid, then, was not a symbol of oppression, but of collective national pride. It was a massive public works project that gave thousands of people a purpose and a steady living. This changes your entire perspective. You've always thought of the pyramids as an almost alien achievement, built by some kind of superhuman effort. But now, you see the human scale of it. You see the sweat, the strain, the cleverness, and the simple, repetitive work that went into creating something so monumental. You see the pride in the faces of the men, the collective satisfaction of building something that will last for millennia. You are watching history being made, and it's a lot more human than you ever imagined. The pyramids are not just tombs for a dead king, they are a monument to the strength, ingenuity, and sheer force of will of the ancient Egyptian people. You're seeing that your modern, cynical view of the past doesn't quite fit the reality. You turn away from the immense, bustling construction site, the rhythmic sounds of stone on stone slowly fading behind you. The physical toll of just watching the labor is exhausting, and you can only imagine what it would feel like to actually participate. It's a harsh reminder that your modern body, so used to comfort and convenience, would not last a day in that kind of work. As you continue your journey, a sudden, sharp pain in your stomach forces you to double over. Remember that gritty bread and dubious water from earlier? Well, your digestive system is officially staging a full-scale revolt. You need help, and you need it fast. You're directed to a building that serves as a rudimentary clinic, a place where the sick and injured are taken inside. A man in a simple linen tunic is at work. This is an ancient Egyptian doctor, and you're about to get a first-hand look at medicine from the past. The clinic is simple, with just a few reed mats on the floor and some basic tools. The doctor examines you, his hands surprisingly gentle. He listens to your symptoms, and you try your best to describe the pain without the modern medical terminology he wouldn't understand. He nods sagely, as if he has a complete understanding of what's going on. A mainstream historical fact, ancient Egyptian medicine was a strange mix of the practical and the magical. Doctors had a surprisingly good understanding of anatomy, thanks to the mummification process, which gave them a close look at the human body. They could set broken bones and even perform simple surgery. They had a wide variety of herbal remedies and would use things like honey and moldy bread to treat infections. A quirky fact, one of the more bizarre remedies found in medical texts was the use of crocodile dung to prevent pregnancy. It was mixed with a paste and inserted into the vagina, where it was thought to act as a barrier. It was, of course, completely ineffective and a breeding ground for bacteria, but it shows the creative and often gross ways they tried to solve problems. A light joke, you'd be looking for the nearest time machine pretty quickly if that was the only option. The doctor, after his examination, gives you a mixture to drink. It's thick, bitter, and smells faintly of herbs and something else you can't quite identify. You drink it, and the hope is that it will do something, anything to help. It might be a potent herbal remedy, or it could be something completely useless. You have no way of knowing. Historians still argue whether ancient Egyptian medicine was more effective than harmful. While some of their remedies were genuinely useful, honey is a natural antiseptic, others were completely based on superstition and would have done more harm than good. The line between doctor and priest was also blurry, and many medical treatments included incantations and prayers to the gods. You'd be hoping for the herbalist side of things rather than the magical. As you sit there, waiting for the remedy to work, you see other patients. A man with a deep gash on his arm is having it cleaned with what looks like wine and then stitched up with a thread and needle. Another person is having a tooth pulled. The pain and the stoicism of the patients are a testament to the lack of anesthesia and painkillers. You're starting to realize that any injury or illness, no matter how minor, is a life-threatening event in this world. Your modern medical knowledge, which you take for granted, is a superpower that you can't use. You're completely at the mercy of this doctor and his strange, unproven remedies. You can only hope that whatever he gave you doesn't make things worse. After a questionable dose of ancient medicine, your stomach still feels unsettled, but the initial wave of sharp pain has subsided. You are now faced with a different kind of challenge, one that is less about physical survival and more about mental endurance. Ancient Egyptian bureaucracy. You have a simple, practical goal. You need to find a place to stay, a small dwelling where you can rest. You're directed to a local official, a man with a stern face and a papyrus scroll under his arm. You approach him and try to explain your situation. He looks at you with a blank expression, then gestures to a long line of people waiting to see him. He's not interested in your story. He's interested in forms, protocols, and the official process. A mainstream historical fact, ancient Egypt was an incredibly bureaucratic society. The government, run by scribes and officials, kept detailed records of everything: grain harvests, taxes, labor rosters, and land ownership. To get anything done, you had to navigate a complex system of paperwork and approvals. A light joke. You thought filling out a tax return was bad. Try doing it with a reed pen and a hieroglyphic form that's 10 feet long. You wait in the line, watching as people present their cases. A farmer is arguing about his taxes, and the official is consulting a papyrus scroll that seems to list every single piece of produce the farmer has ever grown. A woman is trying to register a birth, and the official is asking for a series of details that are so specific and arcane, you can barely follow along. The entire process is slow, deliberate, and designed to maintain a sense of order and control. The official is not there to help you, he is there to enforce the rules. A quirky fact, while the bureaucracy was complex, it was also surprisingly detailed. The Egyptians would record everything from the inventory of a temple to the amount of beer and bread a laborer was paid. These documents, preserved in the dry desert climate, have given historians an incredible amount of insight into their daily lives. Historians still argue whether this bureaucracy was a sign of a highly advanced and efficient state or a burdensome system that stifled individual freedom. What's clear is that it was a huge part of their lives. You couldn't move, work, or even die without the proper forms being filled out and recorded. Your turn finally comes. You try to explain your need for housing. The official asks you a series of questions that you can't answer. Who is your family? Where is your land? What is your occupation? You are, in essence, a person who doesn't exist in his world. You have no history, no family name, and no official record. He looks at you with a mixture of suspicion and confusion, and he's about to turn you away. This is the moment where you realize that without an identity, you are nothing. The social hierarchy we talked about earlier wasn't just a matter of class, it was a matter of official existence, without a place in the system. You are an outcast, a non-person. You are about to be dismissed when an older man, a local who was also waiting in line, vouches for you. He says you are a distant cousin who just arrived. The official, after a long, suspicious look, finally relents. He scribbles something on a piece of papyrus and hands it to you. It's a permit to stay, a simple piece of paper that means everything. You are now, officially, a person in ancient Egypt. You've just learned a very important lesson in a world of rules and records. You need a powerful friend or a very good lie to survive. With a piece of papyrus clutched in your hand, your official ticket to existence, you now have the luxury of taking a break from the constant struggle. The sun is beginning its slow descent, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. You find a small, open courtyard where a few men are sitting on low stools, their workday seemingly over. They are laughing, talking, and playing a game on a small, rectangular board. This is a moment of peace, a chance to see a different side of ancient Egyptian life, one that isn't defined by hardship or fear. The game they're playing is called Senet. It's a board game with 30 squares, and two players move their pieces based on the throw of small sticks or knuckle bones. It's a game of strategy, skill, and a little bit of luck, and it was incredibly popular in all levels of society. A mainstream historical fact, Senet was so popular that ancient Egyptian art often depicts both pharaohs and common people playing it. It was seen as more than just a game. It was believed to be a symbolic journey of the soul through the afterlife, with some squares representing obstacles or blessings from the gods. A light joke, they're basically playing the original version of life, but with way higher stakes. As you watch them play, you also notice a different kind of gathering happening nearby. A wealthy family is hosting a banquet. The sounds of a small lute and a harp drift through the air, and you can see servants bringing out huge platters of food. There are roasted geese, baskets of dates and figs, and an abundance of bread and beer. The guests, dressed in their finest linen and wearing elaborate wigs and makeup, are chatting and socializing. The atmosphere is relaxed and festive, a stark contrast to the gritty, dusty reality of the streets. This is what leisure time looks like for the elite. A quirky fact, while the elite enjoyed these banquets, they would often use scented cones made of wax and myrrh, which they would place on their heads. As the night went on and the cones melted from the heat, the perfume would slowly drip down over their wigs and clothing, releasing a pleasant scent. It was a very practical, if slightly messy, way to stay fragrant in a world without modern deodorants or perfumes. A light joke, it's like a primitive air freshener, but with a much higher risk of getting wax in your eye. Historians still argue whether the ancient Egyptians had a true sense of fun in the modern sense of the word. Were these games and banquets just a way to pass the time, or were they a deeply ingrained part of their culture, a necessary outlet for a life of hard work and religious observance? The evidence suggests that they had a robust appreciation for music, games, and socializing. Their art is filled with scenes of joyful dancing, feasts, and hunting trips. This is a side of them that is often overlooked in favor of the pyramids and mummies, but it's an essential part of their story. You're seeing that even in a world of hardship, people still found ways to connect, to laugh, and to simply be human. The simple joy of a board game or a good meal is a universal experience, and you're getting a much-needed reminder of that. Your journey has been all about survival, but now you've gotten a taste of what makes survival worthwhile. The memory of the festive banquet and the lively game of Senet is a welcome respite from the grinding realities of ancient Egypt. But as you continue your walk, you're reminded that even their downtime was a complex, ritualistic affair. You pass a small group of women gathered in a doorway, and you can't help but notice their faces. They are meticulously painted, their eyes lined with a dark, heavy substance, and their cheeks and lips coloured with a reddish pigment. You've seen this before in modern media, but seeing it in person is a different experience. This is not just makeup, it's an entire system of belief, health, and status. A mainstream historical fact, cosmetics were an integral part of ancient Egyptian life for both men and women. The most famous was kohl, the black eyeliner made from a substance called galena. It wasn't just for beauty, it also had a practical purpose. The dark pigment helped to reduce the glare of the bright sun. Much like the dark paint football players use today, it also had antiseptic properties, protecting the eyes from flies and other irritants. So when you see those famous portraits of pharaohs with perfectly lined eyes, you're not just looking at a fashion statement, you're looking at a practical, health-conscious choice. A light joke. They're basically the original pioneers of SPF makeup, and they didn't even know it. You also notice the colours of their makeup are very specific. There's a reddish colour for the cheeks and lips, and a green substance for the eyes, made from a mineral called malachite. A quirky fact, the ancient Egyptians believed that the green of the malachite was a symbolic representation of new life and fertility, and they would often use it as an offering to the goddess of love, Hathor. The colours were more than just pretty, they were imbued with deep religious and symbolic meaning. A person's makeup could tell you not just their status, but also their religious beliefs and their hopes for a good harvest or a healthy family. And it wasn't just makeup for the face. They used scented oils and perfumes to mask body odour, and they used a variety of creams and ointments to keep their skin soft and hydrated in the dry, harsh climate. Their beauty regimen was an all-encompassing, daily ritual. Historians still argue whether the ancient Egyptians' obsession with cosmetics was more about personal vanity or about a desire to emulate their gods, who were often depicted with perfect, unblemished skin. What's clear is that the line between beauty and spirituality was completely blurred. To be beautiful was to be closer to the divine. As you look at these women, you also notice the intricate hairstyles. They are wearing elaborate wigs, some with braids, some with curls, and some with beads and other decorations. These wigs were often made from human hair, but they could also be made from plant fibers. They were worn to protect the head from the sun and also as a way to show off one's wealth and status. A person with a more elaborate wig was clearly a person of means. You're starting to see that every single aspect of ancient Egyptian life, from their food to their clothing to their makeup, is tied to a complex, layered system of practicality, religion, and social status. This isn't just about looking good, it's about being in the right place, spiritually and socially. It's a whole different kind of vanity. The painted faces and elaborate wigs are a constant reminder of the spiritual world that is interwoven with the mundane. Your walk eventually leads you to a towering, stone structure, a temple. Unlike the busy, chaotic streets, the temple is an island of calm and quiet. The air here is heavy with the scent of incense, and you can hear the faint, rhythmic chanting of priests from somewhere deep within. You are about to enter the heart of ancient Egyptian religious life, a world of powerful gods, complex rituals, and deep-seated beliefs. You are not allowed to go beyond the main courtyard, as the inner sanctuary is reserved for priests and the pharaoh. But even from here, the power of the place is palpable. The walls are covered with intricate carvings and hieroglyphs, telling stories of the gods and the pharaoh's divine connection to them. A mainstream historical fact. Ancient Egyptian religion was polytheistic, meaning they believed in a vast pantheon of gods and goddesses. Each god had a specific role, from Ra, the sun god, to Osiris, the god of the afterlife, and Isis, the goddess of magic and healing. They were not just distant deities, they were an active part of daily life, influencing everything from the harvest to the journey of the soul after death. As you stand in the courtyard, you see a group of priests performing a ritual. They are in clean, white linen, their heads shaved, and they are making offerings of food and drink to a statue of a god. The entire process is deliberate, methodical, and filled with a sense of purpose. This is the core of their faith, a daily act of communion with the divine. A quirky fact: the priests had to undergo an extensive ritual of purification before they could enter the inner sanctuary. This included shaving their entire bodies, not just their heads, and abstaining from certain foods and sexual contact. It was a very serious commitment to their religious duties. A light joke: they're basically on a year-round cleanse, and you're just happy to get a decent meal. You also notice that the temple is not just a place of worship, it's an economic powerhouse. The priests who run it are not just religious leaders, they are administrators who manage vast tracts of land, agricultural production, and an army of laborers. The offerings that are brought to the gods are a form of tax, and they are used to support the temple and its staff. Historians still argue whether the priests' power was a source of stability for the country or a corrupting influence that eventually led to the decline of the pharaohs. What's clear is that they were a powerful force, both spiritually and politically. As you stand there, you feel a sense of awe and a little bit of fear. This is not a religion you can simply observe. It's a living, breathing system that dictates every aspect of life. The gods are real, their power is absolute, and you are a tiny, insignificant speck in their world. The complex, interwoven nature of their religion, from the mummified cats to the daily rituals, is a testament to a worldview that is completely different from your own. You've just had a very intense lesson in faith, and it's a lesson you won't soon forget. You step out of the temple's quiet courtyard, the scent of incense still clinging to your linen tunic. The sun is now a glowing orb, beginning its daily descent toward the horizon. This is not just a sunset, it's a cosmic event. In ancient Egypt, the sun's journey across the sky was the most important story in the universe, and the pharaoh, as the son of the sun god, was at the center of it. A mainstream historical fact: Ra, the sun god, was the chief deity of the ancient Egyptian pantheon. He was the creator god, the king of all other gods, and his journey across the sky each day in a solar bark, a type of boat, was a metaphor for life, death, and rebirth. Every morning, he would be reborn in the east, and every evening, he would journey into the underworld in the west, battling the serpent of chaos, Apep, to be reborn again the next day. This cycle of rebirth was the foundation of the ancient Egyptian worldview. A light joke: it's basically the most epic and high-stakes commute of all time. You watch the sun sink below the horizon, and you feel a profound sense of peace. You can understand why they would worship this star. Its power is absolute. It gives life. But its absence brings darkness and fear. The ancient Egyptians didn't just see a sunrise and sunset. They saw a daily battle between order and chaos. And they saw the pharaoh as the one who helped maintain that order. They would perform daily rituals and prayers to help Ra on his journey, to ensure that the sun would rise again the next day. This is a very different kind of prayer than you're used to. It's not about personal salvation, but about the survival of the entire universe. A quirky fact: while Ra was the most important god, he was often combined with other gods to create new, more powerful deities. Amun-Ra, for example, was a combination of the local god Amun and the sun god Ra. This was a way for priests and pharaohs to consolidate power and create a unified, national religion. The ancient Egyptians were incredibly adaptable, and their religious beliefs were constantly evolving and changing to fit the political and social landscape. Historians still argue whether this was a genuine act of faith or a cynical power play by the priestly class. What's clear is that the religious landscape of ancient Egypt was a fluid, ever-changing thing. As the last sliver of the sun disappears, the world around you is plunged into a profound, inky darkness. There is no electricity here, no streetlights, and the only light comes from the moon and the stars. You are suddenly very aware of the sounds of the night, the rustling of the reeds along the Nile, the chirping of insects, and the distant howl of a jackal. It's a primal, slightly scary experience. The ancient Egyptians believed that the night was a time of danger, when the forces of chaos were at their strongest. This is why the journey of Ra through the underworld was so important. The sun's return was a victory, a promise of another day. You've just witnessed the most important ritual of ancient Egypt, and it was just the sun going down. you're starting to see that every single aspect of this world is imbued with a spiritual meaning that you can barely comprehend. The darkness of the night feels both eerie and calming. The lack of artificial light has made the stars impossibly bright, and you can see the Milky Way arching across the sky like a river of diamonds. But in this world, darkness isn't just about the absence of light, it's also about a journey, a final one. The sounds of the night, which just moments ago felt primal, now feel like a gentle chorus, a natural progression toward the inevitable. Your thoughts turn from the living to the dead. A transition that was a natural part of the ancient Egyptian worldview. You are now at a funeral procession. The air is thick with a different kind of solemnity, a mix of grief and religious reverence. The family of the deceased is wailing and chanting, and the body is being carried on a simple stretcher. You can see the family members, their eyebrows shaved off as a sign of mourning, a quirky fact we learned earlier. This is not just a funeral, it's the beginning of a long and complex journey into the afterlife. A mainstream historical fact, the ancient Egyptians believed that death was not the end, but a transition to a new and better life. Their entire civilization was built around this belief. They spent their lives preparing for their death, and the tombs, the pyramids, and the mummification process were all designed to ensure a safe and successful journey to the next world. The procession is heading toward a tomb, a simple structure in the desert. The body will be placed inside, and then the long, arduous process of mummification will begin. This is not a quick affair. It will take up to 70 days. The body has to be cleaned, organs removed and placed in canopic jars, and then the body is packed with natron salt to dry it out. It's a grisly, hands-on process, and it was done by priests and specially trained embalmers who knew the rituals and the steps by heart. A light joke, it's the most high-stakes preservation project of all time, and you definitely wouldn't want to mess up. Historians still argue whether the ancient Egyptians' obsession with the afterlife was a sign of a deep-seated fear of death or a profound optimism about what lay beyond it. What's clear is that they had a very specific vision of the next world. The afterlife was not a vague concept, it was a physical place called the Field of Reeds, a perfect version of Egypt where you could live forever, free from the hardships of your earthly life. But to get there, you had to pass a series of trials and challenges, including having your heart weighed against the feather of Maat, the goddess of truth and justice. If your heart was heavy with sin, it would be devoured by a creature called Amit, and you would cease to exist. As you stand there, watching the funeral procession, you feel a profound sense of the finality of life and the immense hope that the ancient Egyptians placed in their faith. They didn't just mourn the dead, they celebrated their journey, believing that they would live again. This is a very different kind of grief than you're used to. A mix of sorrow and a quiet, profound hope. You've just had a front-row seat to the most important transition in ancient Egyptian life, and it's a powerful and humbling experience. The funeral procession has now reached the small tomb in the desert, and the work of preparing the body for its journey to the afterlife is beginning. You are not allowed to go inside, but you can see the initial stages of a ritual that is as famous as the pyramids themselves, mummification. This is a truly hands-on, grisly process, and you're glad you're only an observer. The body is placed on a stone slab, and the embalmers, priests who specialized in this art, begin their work. A mainstream historical fact, the mummification process was incredibly complex and precise, and it was done to preserve the body in a recognizable state for the soul to inhabit in the afterlife. The first and most critical step was the removal of the internal organs. A special incision was made on the left side of the body, and the organs, the liver, lungs, stomach, and intestines were carefully removed. A quirkier fact, the brain was removed through the nose using a long, hooked tool. It was then discarded, as the ancient Egyptians believed the heart, not the brain, was the seat of intelligence and emotion. A light joke, they probably had a very different definition of a brain drain back then. The organs that were removed were not simply thrown away. They were carefully preserved and placed in canopic jars, each one dedicated to a specific god. The liver was placed in a jar with a human head, the lungs in a jar with a jackal head, the stomach in a jar with a baboon head, and the intestines in a jar with a falcon head. These jars were then placed in the tomb with the mummy, as they were believed to be essential for the soul's journey. The heart was left in the body, as it was needed for the final judgment in the afterlife. The body, now hollowed out, was then packed with natron salt, a natural salt found in the desert. This was done to completely dry out the body, a process that took up to 40 days. After that, the body was cleaned, rubbed with oils and perfumes, and then carefully wrapped in hundreds of yards of linen bandages. This was a very ritualistic process, and each layer of bandage was placed with a specific purpose. Charms and amulets were often placed between the layers to protect the body and help the soul on its journey. Historians still argue whether the ancient Egyptians' obsession with mummification was a sign of a deep-seated fear of decay or a profound belief in the resurrection of the body. What's clear is that it was an incredibly important part of their faith. As you watch the embalmers at work, you realize that your body, if you were to die here, would not be given this kind of care. You are not a pharaoh or a person of means. Your body would probably be simply buried in the sand, where the dry desert heat would naturally mummify it. This is a very different kind of final journey, and it's a sobering thought. You've just seen the beginning of the most famous death ritual in history. And it's a powerful and slightly horrifying reminder of the vast gulf between their world and yours. After witnessing the macabre beginnings of the mummification process, you wisely decide to put some distance between yourself and the tomb. The desert is a big, empty place, but you get the sense that even here, away from the bustling city, there are hidden dangers. You walk among the small, simple tombs of the common people, and you notice something strange. Some of the tombs have been disturbed, the entrance is broken, and the contents rifled through. You hear whispers from the locals about this, a hushed fear that is more potent than the fear of the gods. A mainstream historical fact, tomb raiding was a serious and widespread problem in ancient Egypt. The tombs, filled with the possessions and wealth of the dead, were a tempting target for robbers. The pharaoh's tombs, especially, were a treasure trove of gold, jewels, and other valuable objects. The ancient Egyptians went to great lengths to protect their tombs, building them in remote locations and placing complex booby traps and hidden chambers. A light joke, they basically invented the original escape room, but with way more death and a lot less fun. You hear a story from a group of men sitting in the shade. They whisper about the curses that were placed on the tombs to deter robbers. The curses were often inscribed on the walls of the tombs, promising horrible fates to anyone who dared to disturb the pharaoh's eternal rest. These weren't just idle threats, they were believed to be real. A quirky fact, while the curses were meant to deter robbers, some of the more famous curses, like the one associated with the tomb of Tutankhamun, were more of a modern invention. The curse of the mummy became a popular story in the early 20th century, a spooky narrative that appealed to the public's fascination with ancient Egypt. Historians still argue whether the ancient Egyptians actually believed the curses would have a supernatural effect or if they were just a very clever piece of psychological warfare. What's clear is that they had some effect, as many people were genuinely terrified of the pharaoh's wrath. Despite the curses and the booby traps, the tombs were still plundered. The desire for wealth was often stronger than the fear of a supernatural curse. The ancient Egyptians would sometimes even hire guards to protect the tombs. But these guards were often corrupt and would work with the robbers. The royal tombs in the Valley of the Kings, for example, were plundered so systematically that only a handful of intact tombs, like Tutankhamun's, have ever been found. As you walk among the disturbed tombs, you get a sense of the immense power and value of the afterlife. The possessions that were buried with the dead were not just a sign of wealth, they were believed to be essential for the journey to the next world. To steal from a tomb was not just a crime, it was an act of sacrilege, a direct assault on a person's eternal soul. You're starting to see that even in death, the ancient Egyptians were not safe. Their fear of tomb robbers was a very real, very human fear. And it's a powerful reminder that their world was not a perfect, utopian society. It was a world of greed, fear, and a constant struggle for survival. Even after you were gone, after a jarring reminder of ancient greed, you continue your journey through the city. The sun is now high in the sky, and the daily rhythm of life has returned to full swing. You pass a home where you see a woman managing the household. She is giving instructions to a servant, overseeing the grinding of grain, and scolding a child for making a mess. She is not a subservient figure, she is a manager, a leader, and a vital part of her family's economic life. This is a very different image from what you might have expected. A mainstream historical fact: women in ancient Egypt had a surprising amount of legal and social rights compared to women in other ancient civilizations. Like Greece or Rome, they could own property, sign contracts, and initiate legal proceedings. They were considered equals in the eyes of the law. They could also work in a variety of professions, including weaving, farming, and even as priestesses. While they were still expected to manage the household and raise children, their lives were not confined to the home. A light joke: they were basically the original girl bosses, and they didn't even need a blog to prove it. You also notice the women's clothing and appearance. They are wearing simple, but elegant, linen dresses, often with intricate jewelry. Their hair is braided or covered with a wig. Their makeup is as meticulous as the men's. They are not just objects of beauty, they are active participants in society. A quirky fact: ancient Egyptian marriage was not a legal or religious ceremony, it was a social contract, and women were free to leave their husbands and take their property with them. This is a very different kind of social arrangement from what you're used to. A testament to a culture that valued women's rights in a way that was far ahead of its time. Historians still argue whether the rights of women were a sign of a truly egalitarian society or if they were still subordinate to men in practice. What's clear is that they had a level of autonomy that was rare in the ancient world. They could be powerful figures in their own right, and some women, like the pharaoh Hatshepsut, even ruled Egypt. Her story is a fascinating one, a testament to the immense power that a woman could wield in this society. As you watch the women of the city, you get a sense of a world that is not as black and white as you thought. The social hierarchy was rigid, yes, but it was not based on gender. Women had a place in the system, and it was a place of power and respect. This is a very different kind of sexism than you're used to. A reminder that the struggles of the past are not always the ones you expect. You've just had a very important lesson in ancient Egyptian gender roles. And it's a powerful and humbling experience. The sight of women running their households with such autonomy is a fascinating glimpse into a culture that was, in many ways, surprisingly advanced. But as you leave the city and head toward the fertile land surrounding the Nile, the reality of most people's lives comes into sharp focus. The air here is no longer dusty, it's humid and rich with the smell of wet soil and growing plants. The ground is a deep, fertile black, a stark contrast to the barren desert you've seen so far. This is the Nile floodplain, the engine of the entire ancient Egyptian civilization. A mainstream historical fact: ancient Egyptian agriculture was entirely dependent on the annual flooding of the Nile. Every year, from July to October, the river would overflow its banks, depositing a layer of rich, black silt onto the surrounding land. This was called the inundation, and it was the source of all life. Farmers would plant their crops, wheat, barley, and flax, in this fertile soil as soon as the water receded. This was a system that had worked for millennia, and the entire calendar and religious life of the Egyptians was built around it. A light joke: they didn't need a weather app, they just needed to wait for the river to do its thing. You see a group of men working in the fields, their bodies bent over as they use simple wooden plows, pulled by oxen, to prepare the soil. The work is back-breaking and repetitive, and it is a constant struggle against the sun, the bugs, and the unpredictability of the river. A quirky fact: the ancient Egyptians developed a complex system of irrigation canals to divert the floodwaters to their fields. They also used a device called a shadoof, a simple machine that used a long pole with a counterweight on one end and a bucket on the other, to lift water from the canals to the fields. It was a simple but incredibly effective piece of engineering that allowed them to control the flow of water and ensure a good harvest. As you get closer to the fields, you also notice the presence of the scribes and officials. They are there to measure the land, record the harvest, and collect the taxes. The farmers, who are doing all the hard work, are at the very bottom of the social hierarchy, and they are constantly at the mercy of the government and the river. Historians still argue whether the farmers were content with their lot or if they were a subjugated class who were constantly on the verge of revolt. What's clear is that their lives were incredibly difficult and they had very little control over their own destinies. You're starting to see that the magnificent art and architecture of ancient Egypt was built on the backs of these farmers. The grain they grew fed the people who built the pyramids, and the taxes they paid filled the coffers of the pharaoh and the priests. This is a very different kind of reality from the one you've been seeing in the city. This is the hard, unromantic truth of ancient Egypt, a world where survival was a constant, daily struggle. You've just had a taste of what it would be like to be a farmer here, and it's a powerful and humbling experience. You'll never look at a loaf of bread the same way again. The back-breaking work of the farmers is a powerful reminder that ancient Egypt wasn't all pyramids and gold, but the country wasn't just built on agriculture, it was also protected by a powerful military. You are now leaving the peaceful fields and entering a training ground where you see a group of soldiers drilling. The air is filled with the shouts of a commander and the rhythmic clatter of wooden swords and shields. This is the ancient Egyptian army. And it's a far cry from the modern, highly mechanized military you're used to. A mainstream historical fact, the ancient Egyptian army was a formidable force, and it was essential for both defense and expansion. The army was composed of both native Egyptians and foreign mercenaries, and it was organized into divisions with specific names, like the division of Amun or the division of Ra. The soldiers were armed with simple but effective weapons, like bows and arrows, spears, and a curved sword called a khopesh. They also had simple shields made of wood and leather. A light joke, they were basically the original action heroes, but with a much higher risk of getting a splinter. You watch as the soldiers practice their formations. They are a disciplined, well-oiled machine, and they move with a sense of purpose and coordination. This is not a group of random conscripts, it's a professional army. A quirky fact, while the soldiers were often depicted as clean-shaven and in crisp linen tunics, the reality was much different. They would often go into battle with leather armor, and they would wear a variety of helmets and other protective gear. They were also known for their use of chariots, a powerful new weapon that revolutionized warfare in the Near East. The chariots were fast, light, and could carry 2 men, one to drive and one to shoot a bow and arrow. As you watch the soldiers, you also get a sense of the culture of military life. They are a tight-knit group, and they have a strong sense of camaraderie. They are not just fighting for the pharaoh, they are fighting for their families, their homes, and their way of life. Historians still argue whether the ancient Egyptian army was more of a defensive force or an expansionist one. What's clear is that they were a powerful tool for the pharaoh, and they were used to protect the borders, put down revolts, and expand the empire. You're starting to realize that your journey here is not just about survival, it's about a world that is constantly on the brink of war. The peace you've seen in the city and the fields is a fragile thing, and it is protected by this army. You've just had a very intense lesson in military life, and it's a powerful and humbling experience. You're glad you're not a part of it, and you're even more grateful for the quiet life of the city. The disciplined sounds of the army fade behind you, and you find yourself once again in a small, crowded tavern. The atmosphere is loud, boisterous, and a bit smoky from a cooking fire in the corner. People are sitting on low stools, laughing and talking, and they are all drinking from small clay mugs. The drink is a thick, brownish liquid that looks more like a soup than a beverage. This is ancient Egyptian beer, and it's a far cry from the modern, crisp, golden lager you might be thinking of. It's a meal in a mug, and it's about to be your next culinary experience. A mainstream historical fact, beer was the staple beverage of the ancient Egyptians, and it was consumed by everyone, from the pharaoh to the lowliest laborer. It was not a luxury, it was a fundamental part of their diet. It was made from fermented barley or wheat, and it was thick and low in alcohol. The fermentation process killed many of the bacteria in the water, making it a safer alternative to drinking straight from the Nile. It was also a source of calories and nutrients, and labourers were often paid in bread and beer. A light joke, you've officially found the original liquid lunch, and it's not quite as refreshing as you'd hoped. You take a sip from the mug, and the taste is interesting. It's a bit sweet, a bit sour, and it has a grainy texture that makes you want to chew it more than drink it. A quirky fact, ancient Egyptian beer was often unfiltered, so it would have had a lot of leftover bits of grain and sediment in it. People would often drink it through a strainer or a piece of cloth to get rid of the chunks. This is why you see so many depictions of people drinking beer with a straw. It wasn't just for style, it was a matter of practicality. As you sit there, sipping your beer, you start to feel a little bit more relaxed. The alcohol content is low, but the sense of camaraderie in the tavern is infectious. People are playing a game of senet, and they are all talking about the harvest, the pharaoh, and the latest gossip. This is a moment of peace, a break from the constant struggle for survival. Historians still argue whether the ancient Egyptians' love of beer was a sign of a society that was constantly trying to escape its hardships, or if it was a genuine appreciation for a delicious and nutritious beverage. What's clear is that it was an essential part of their lives. The beer is also a reminder of the ingenuity of the ancient Egyptians. They took a simple grain, water, and some wild yeast, and they created a beverage that was both a source of life and a source of joy. They didn't have the modern science of brewing, they just had a deep understanding of the natural world and a lot of trial and error. You've just had a very strange, very old, and very important drink. And it's a powerful and humbling experience. You're starting to see that even the most mundane things in this world are steeped in history and culture. You'll never look at a beer the same way again. The warm, grainy taste of the beer is a soothing balm for your weary body and mind, but your moment of peace is short-lived. You overhear a heated argument between two men at a nearby table. It's about a disputed piece of land, and it quickly escalates from a simple disagreement to a loud, furious shouting match. You brace yourself for a fight, but before it can come to blows, a man in a clean, white tunic and a shaved head steps in. He is a local magistrate, and he is about to administer justice in ancient Egyptian style. A mainstream historical fact, the ancient Egyptians had a well-developed legal system, and while it might seem a bit rough by our standards, it was surprisingly fair. The system was based on a concept called Ma'at, the goddess of truth, justice, and cosmic order. The pharaoh was the ultimate arbiter of the law, but he delegated this power to a series of officials and magistrates. The local magistrate would hear disputes and hand down a verdict. The punishments could be severe, including flogging, imprisonment, or even death. But the process was often based on evidence and testimony. A light joke, they didn't have a jury of your peers, but they did have a magistrate who was probably very good at telling who was lying. You watch as the magistrate listens to both sides of the story. The two men, still angry, present their evidence. One has a small piece of papyrus with a land deed, and the other has a witness who saw the land being worked. The magistrate listens patiently, his face impassive. He then asks a series of questions, trying to get to the heart of the matter. He is not interested in who is right or wrong, but in what is fair and just according to the law. A quirky fact, while the legal system was based on Ma'at, it was not always administered with perfect fairness. Bribery and corruption were a problem, as they are in any society. A magistrate could be swayed by a powerful person or a bribe, but there was also a system of appeals. If you felt the verdict was unfair, you could appeal to a higher court or even to the vizier himself. Historians still argue whether the ancient Egyptian legal system was more of a tool for maintaining social order or a genuine attempt at justice. What's clear is that it was a complex and important part of their society. The magistrate finally makes his decision. He rules in favor of the man with the land deed, as it is the only official record of ownership. The other man is furious, but he accepts the verdict. He knows that to defy the magistrate is to defy the pharaoh, and that is a very dangerous thing to do. The magistrate then gives a short sermon on the importance of Ma'at and the need for everyone to live in a just and orderly society. He is not just a judge, he is also a moral leader, a teacher of the law. You've just had a very intense lesson in ancient Egyptian justice, and it's a powerful and humbling experience. You're starting to see that every aspect of this world, even a simple argument, is imbued with a deep sense of order and cosmic purpose. The magistrate's verdict settles the dispute, and the tavern returns to its noisy, chaotic state. As you take another sip of your thick, grainy beer, you notice something else in the room. People are wearing small, intricate objects around their necks, on their wrists, and even tucked into their clothing. These aren't just pieces of jewelry, they are amulets, and they are a constant reminder that the spiritual world is always present. A mainstream historical fact. Ancient Egyptians believed in the power of magic and the use of protective charms. These amulets were thought to ward off evil spirits, protect the wearer from harm, and bring good luck. They came in a wide variety of shapes and sizes, and each one had a specific purpose. For example, the Eye of Horus was a popular amulet that was believed to protect the wearer from disease and injury. The Ankh, the symbol of life, was thought to bring eternal life and health. A light joke, they basically had the original good luck charms. And they were a lot more stylish than a rabbit's foot. You also notice that some people have small tattoos on their bodies, often of a scarab beetle or a specific god. These weren't just for decoration, they were also believed to be a form of permanent protection. A quirky fact: some tattoos have been found on ancient mummies, suggesting that this was a very old and widespread practice. It was a way of ensuring that you were protected in this life and in the next. The ancient Egyptians believed that the tattoos would stay with you in the afterlife, so you would be protected even after you were gone. As you sit there, you start to feel a sense of unease. You don't have any of these amulets. You are completely unprotected in a world of gods, demons, and angry spirits. You feel a sudden need for one of these small charms, a physical representation of protection. You're starting to see that your modern, rational worldview is a handicap here. You are in a world where magic is real, and to ignore it is to put yourself in danger. Historians still argue whether the ancient Egyptians truly believed in the power of these amulets, or if they were more of a psychological comfort. What's clear is that they were an essential part of their lives. They were worn by everyone, from the pharaoh to the lowliest farmer, and they were a powerful symbol of their faith. You decide to buy a small amulet from a local vendor. It's a simple, blue scarab beetle, and it's made of a glazed material called faience. It's not a priceless piece of gold, but it's a start. You put it on, and you feel a small sense of relief. It's a small, insignificant object, but in this world, it means everything. You've just had a very intense lesson in ancient Egyptian superstition, and it's a powerful and humbling experience. You're starting to see that the line between the sacred and the mundane is completely blurred, and to survive, you have to be willing to believe in a little bit of magic. The small scarab amulet feels cool against your skin, a tiny weight that represents a newfound sense of security in a world filled with unseen threats. Your journey continues, taking you away from the tavern and back toward the immense, stone structures of the city. You are now approaching a vast complex of buildings, far grander than any other you've seen. This is a major temple, a spiritual and economic hub for the entire region. The walls are covered in intricate reliefs, and the air is thick with the scent of incense and sacred rituals. A mainstream historical fact: ancient Egyptian temples were not just places of worship, they were also immense economic powerhouses. The priests who ran them were not just religious leaders, they were a powerful class of administrators who managed vast tracts of land, agricultural production, and an army of laborers and craftsmen. The temples received a huge amount of the country's wealth in the form of offerings and taxes, and they used this wealth to support the priests, the temple staff, and the community. A light joke: they were basically the original mega-churches, but with a lot more grain and a lot less flashy marketing. You see a priest overseeing the delivery of a huge amount of grain. He is dressed in a clean, white linen tunic, his head is shaved, and he is meticulously recording the amount of grain on a papyrus scroll. He is not just a religious figure, he is a bureaucrat, a manager, and a powerful man in his own right. A quirky fact: while the pharaoh was the ultimate ruler, the power of the priests could, at times, rival his. They had immense influence over the people and the economy, and they were often at odds with the pharaoh over who had the ultimate control. The priests of the god Amun, for example, became so powerful during the New Kingdom that they effectively ruled the country. Historians still argue whether the immense wealth and power of the priests was a sign of a corrupt religious system or a necessary way to maintain social and economic order. What's clear is that they were a powerful force. Both politically and spiritually, they were the intermediaries between the people and the gods. And they controlled a huge amount of the country's resources. They were also the guardians of ancient knowledge, the scribes and scholars who preserved the religious texts and the history of the country. As you stand there, watching the priests at work, you get a sense of a world that is not just ruled by one man, the pharaoh, but by a complex system of power and influence. The pharaoh might be the divine ruler, but the priests are the ones who run the day-to-day operations. You're starting to see that the ancient Egyptian government was a lot more complex and nuanced than you thought. It wasn't a simple dictatorship, it was a system of checks and balances, and the priests were the most powerful check of all. You've just had a very intense lesson in ancient Egyptian political science, and it's a powerful and humbling experience. You're starting to see that power, in this world, comes in many different forms. The immense power of the priests is a humbling realization, a reminder that the world here is far more complex than it appears on the surface. But your journey is about to take you away from the complexities of land ownership and political power and back to the simple, raw realities of this world. You are now on the banks of the Nile, and you are about to take a trip. A small, simple boat with a single sail is being prepared, and you are about to get a first-hand look at the most important highway in ancient Egypt. A mainstream historical fact, the Nile was the lifeblood of ancient Egypt, and it was the primary means of transportation for everything, from people to goods to massive stone blocks for the pyramids. The river flowed from south to north, and the winds in Egypt blew from north to south, which meant that sailing upstream and downstream was incredibly easy. To go north, you would simply let the current carry you. To go south, you would raise your sail and let the wind push you. It was a perfect system, a gift from nature that made travel and trade incredibly efficient. A light joke, they basically had the original two-way street, and it was a lot less stressful than modern traffic. You step onto the boat, and it feels a bit wobbly, but sturdy. It's made of papyrus reeds, which were abundant along the banks of the river. The boatman, a weathered man with a kind smile, pulls up the anchor, and you begin to glide along the surface of the water. The air is cool and refreshing, a welcome relief from the oppressive heat of the city. You watch the world pass by, and it's a breathtaking sight. You see fields of wheat and barley, small villages with mud brick houses, and the towering temples and tombs of the pharaohs. A quirky fact: while the Nile was the main highway, it was also home to a variety of dangerous creatures, like crocodiles and hippos. The ancient Egyptians, in their usual fashion, found a way to coexist with these animals. They would often hunt hippos, as their hide was used to make a variety of things, and they would revere crocodiles as the sacred animals of the god Sobek. They had a complex relationship with the river, one that was filled with both danger and a deep sense of respect. Historians still argue whether the ancient Egyptians' love of the river was a genuine act of faith or a simple appreciation for the practical gifts it gave them. What's clear is that the Nile was more than just a river. It was a central part of their identity, their calendars, their religion, and their entire way of life were built around its annual flooding and its constant, life-giving flow. You're starting to see that this river is not just a source of water, it's the very soul of this civilization. You've just had a very intense lesson in ancient Egyptian geography, and it's a powerful and humbling experience. You're starting to see that every single aspect of this world is connected, and the Nile is the thread that holds it all together. You'll never look at a river the same way again, gliding along the Nile. You feel a sense of peace that has been hard to find in this ancient world. The river is a constant, a soothing presence in a world of chaos and struggle. But the peaceful journey is about to be interrupted by a new, more worldly kind of bustle. You are approaching a bustling port city, a hub of trade and commerce where ships from all over the ancient world are docked. The air here is filled with the smells of spices, exotic woods, and the sounds of a dozen different languages. A mainstream historical fact: ancient Egypt was a major power in the ancient world, and it had a vast network of trade with other countries. The Egyptians would trade their surplus grain, papyrus, and gold for a variety of goods they couldn't produce themselves, like timber from Lebanon, incense and myrrh from Punt, a mysterious land believed to be in modern-day Eritrea or Ethiopia, and precious stones from the Aegean. This trade network was a source of immense wealth for the pharaoh, and it was a way for Egypt to project its power and influence. A light joke, they basically had the original global economy, and it was a lot more personal and a lot less digital. You see merchants from all over the ancient world. There are men with dark skin and intricate jewelry from the land of Punt, men with long beards and flowing robes from Mesopotamia, and men with tanned skin and short tunics from the Aegean. They are all here, in this one place, to buy and sell goods. It's a testament to the immense power and influence of ancient Egypt. A quirky fact: the ancient Egyptians were so dependent on the timber from Lebanon that they even had a special relationship with the city of Byblos. The pharaoh would send gifts to the rulers of Byblos, and in return, they would send him a steady supply of cedar wood, which was used to build everything from ships to coffins. As you walk through the market, you hear the sounds of haggling and the shouting of vendors. The air is thick with a sense of energy and purpose. This is a place where you can see the world, and you are starting to realize that ancient Egypt was not a closed-off, isolated civilization. It was a major player on the world stage, and it was constantly in contact with other countries and cultures. Historians still argue whether the foreign influence on ancient Egypt was a sign of a vibrant, open culture or a slow erosion of their own unique identity. What's clear is that the country was constantly in flux, and it was always adapting and changing. You're also starting to realize that your journey here is not just about a single civilization. It's about a moment in time when the world was a very different place. You've just had a very intense lesson in ancient Egyptian foreign relations, and it's a powerful and humbling experience. You're starting to see that every single aspect of this world, from the food you eat to the goods you buy, is connected to a much larger, more complex story. You'll never look at a cedar tree the same way again. The bustling port city, with its foreign merchants and exotic goods, is a powerful reminder that ancient Egypt was a civilization deeply connected to the wider world. You're about to get another glimpse into this world, but this time it's not about commerce, it's about play. You are now at a large, open field where a group of men and boys are engaged in a variety of athletic activities. They are wrestling, running, and jumping, and the air is filled with the sounds of their shouts and laughter. This is ancient Egyptian sports, and it's a far cry from the modern, highly organized Olympic Games you might be thinking of. A mainstream historical fact: ancient Egyptians loved sports, and they were a major part of their culture. They would participate in a variety of activities, from wrestling and boxing to running and swimming. The pharaohs would often sponsor these events, and the winners would be rewarded with honors and prizes. These sports were not just for fun, they were also a way to train the army, and they were a way for the pharaoh to show his own physical prowess and strength. A light joke, they basically had the original PE class, and it was a lot more intense than dodgeball. You watch as two men engage in a wrestling match. They are strong, athletic, and they move with a sense of purpose and skill. The rules seem simple: pin your opponent to the ground. There are no fancy moves or complex rules. It's a pure test of strength and endurance. A quirky fact: ancient Egyptian art often depicts these wrestling matches, and the poses are so detailed and specific that modern historians have been able to reconstruct the various moves and holds they used. It's a testament to the skill and artistry of the ancient Egyptian athletes. As you watch the men play, you also get a sense of the culture of sports. It's not about winning or losing, it's about the joy of the game and the camaraderie of the athletes. They are not just competitors, they are friends, and they are all celebrating the simple pleasure of physical activity. Historians still argue whether the ancient Egyptian sports were a sign of a society that valued physical fitness, or if they were a simple form of entertainment. What's clear is that they were an important part of their lives, and they were a way for people to connect with each other and with their gods. The ancient Egyptians also had a variety of other sports, including a game that was a lot like modern hockey, with a stick and a ball, and a water sport that involved two teams in papyrus boats trying to knock each other into the river. They were a people who loved games, and they found a way to turn every aspect of their lives into a fun and engaging activity. You've just had a very intense lesson in ancient Egyptian sports, and it's a powerful and humbling experience. You're starting to see that every single aspect of this world, from the most mundane to the most sacred, is imbued with a sense of purpose and joy. You'll never look at a stick and a ball the same way again. The energy of the sports field is a powerful reminder of the physical strength and vitality of the ancient Egyptians. But as you leave the field, you're reminded that not everyone in this society was free to play games. You are now in a wealthy nobleman's home, and you see a group of people working in the courtyard. They are not paid laborers, they are slaves, and their lives are a stark contrast to the life of the people you've been observing. A mainstream historical fact: slavery was a reality in ancient Egypt. But it was a very different kind of slavery from what you might be thinking. It was not based on race or ethnicity, and slaves were often prisoners of war, people who sold themselves into servitude to pay off a debt, or children of slaves. They were considered property, but they had a surprising number of legal rights. They could own property, marry a free person, and even appeal to the courts if they were mistreated. A quirky fact: some slaves could even earn their freedom, or their masters could grant it to them. The system was more fluid than in many other ancient civilizations. A light joke: they basically had the original side hustle, and it was a lot more dangerous than selling things on eBay. You see a young woman working in the kitchen. She is a Nubian, and her skin is a deep, rich brown. She is not a prisoner, but her family was captured in a war, and she has been serving this family for years. She is treated with a certain amount of respect, but she is still a slave. She has no say in her life, and she is completely at the mercy of her masters. You see an older man, an Egyptian, who sold himself into servitude to pay off a debt. He works in the garden, and he is treated with a bit more respect, as he is from the same culture as his masters. He is a part of the family, but he is still a slave. Historians still argue whether the ancient Egyptian system of slavery was a sign of a more humane society or if it was still a brutal and dehumanizing practice. What's clear is that the lives of slaves were incredibly difficult, and they had very little control over their own destinies. They were often used as status symbols, a sign of a family's wealth and power. A wealthy nobleman might have a dozen slaves working in his household, and they would be a clear sign of his place in society. The more slaves you had, the more powerful you were. You're starting to see that this society, for all its art and beauty, was built on a foundation of inequality and injustice. The peace and prosperity you've seen in the city and the fields were not enjoyed by everyone. There was a hidden class of people who were completely at the mercy of their masters, and their lives were a constant struggle. You've just had a very intense lesson in ancient Egyptian social justice, and it's a powerful and humbling experience. You're starting to see that even the most beautiful civilizations have a dark side, and you're now a witness to it. You'll never look at a luxurious home the same way again. The uncomfortable reality of slavery lingers in your mind as you continue your journey, but your gaze is soon pulled upward, away from the mundane struggles of daily life, toward the monumental. You are now standing in front of a massive obelisk, a single, towering stone monolith that seems to reach for the heavens. Its surface is covered in intricate hieroglyphs, telling a story that has been lost to time. It's an impossibly large piece of stone, and you can't help but wonder how they got it here. A mainstream historical fact: ancient Egyptian engineering was a marvel of the ancient world. They were masters of moving massive amounts of stone, and they used a variety of simple but incredibly effective techniques. They would quarry the stone with copper tools, and they would then transport it on sledges, which slid on a lubricated path. The obelisks, which were often quarried in Aswan, would be floated down the Nile on a massive barge. The final lift and placement of the obelisk was done with a series of ropes, pulleys, and ramps. It was a slow, painstaking process, but it worked. A light joke: they basically had the original heavy lifting, and it was a lot more manual than a modern crane. You also notice the incredible precision of the obelisk. The stone is perfectly smooth, and the hieroglyphs are carved with an impossible level of detail. A quirky fact: ancient Egyptian stonemasons were so skilled that they could cut and place stone blocks with a level of precision that is still a mystery to modern engineers. The joints between the blocks in the Great Pyramid, for example, are so tight that you can't even fit a credit card between them. Historians still argue whether they used a level of advanced mathematics that we don't have a record of, or if it was just a matter of incredible skill and patience. What's clear is that they were masters of their craft. As you stand there, looking up at the obelisk, you get a sense of the sheer force of will that it took to build something so monumental. This wasn't just a building project, it was a statement of power, a testament to the might of the pharaoh and the ingenuity of his people. The obelisk is a symbol of their connection to the gods, a direct line to the sun god Ra. It's a physical representation of their faith and their power. You're starting to see that every single one of these monuments, from the pyramids to the temples, is a testament to the incredible skill and ingenuity of the ancient Egyptians. They were not just a people who believed in magic and superstition, they were also a people who understood the laws of physics and engineering. They found a way to use simple tools and an immense amount of human labor to create something that would last for millennia. You've just had a very intense lesson in ancient Egyptian engineering, and it's a powerful and humbling experience. You'll never look at a tall building the same way again. The towering obelisk, a monument to ancient engineering, is a powerful and humbling sight. But as you continue your journey, your gaze is drawn to the most famous of all ancient Egyptian marvels, the Great Pyramids of Giza. They stand on the horizon, an immense and iconic presence. Their sharp, geometric forms a stark contrast to the rolling sand dunes. You've seen them in history books and on television, but seeing them in person is a completely different experience. They are not just buildings, they are mountains of stone, a physical manifestation of an entire civilization's faith and power. A mainstream historical fact: the Great Pyramids were built as tombs for the pharaohs. The pharaohs believed that a well-preserved body was essential for their journey to the afterlife. And the pyramids, with their massive stone walls and complex internal passages, were designed to be a secure resting place for their remains. The largest of the three, the Great Pyramid of Khufu, was the tallest man-made structure in the world for over 3,800 years. It was a testament to the immense power of the pharaoh and the belief that he was a god on earth. A light joke: they basically had the original forever home, and it came with a much more impressive view. You get closer to the pyramids, and you see the details you can't see from a distance. The smooth, white limestone casing, which once covered the entire pyramid, is now mostly gone, leaving a rough, stepped surface. The top of the pyramid, however, still has a small section of the original casing, a testament to what it once looked like. A quirky fact: the casing stones were so precisely cut and placed that the pyramids would have shined brightly in the sun, a beacon of light in the middle of the desert. The pyramids were not just tombs, they were also a symbolic representation of the sun's rays, a direct link between the pharaoh and his divine father, Ra. Historians still argue whether the pyramids were more of a religious monument or a symbol of the pharaoh's political power. What's clear is that they were both. The pyramids were a way for the pharaoh to show his immense wealth and power, but they were also a deeply spiritual and religious statement. The pyramid's shape, its placement, and its internal passages were all designed to help the pharaoh on his journey to the afterlife. The pyramids were not just a tomb, they were a roadmap to eternity. You're starting to realize that your journey here is not just about survival, it's about a civilization that was obsessed with death and the afterlife. The pyramids are a constant reminder of this. They are a physical representation of their faith, their power, and their ingenuity. You've just had a very intense lesson in ancient Egyptian religious beliefs, and it's a powerful and humbling experience. You're starting to see that every single one of these monuments, from the smallest amulet to the largest pyramid, is a testament to a people who believed in a life after this one. You'll never look at a tomb the same way again. The immense scale of the pyramids, a monument to the pharaoh's eternal resting place, is almost overwhelming. But as you turn away from the silent, ancient stones, you're reminded that the desert here is not as empty as it seems. There are hidden dangers, small and deadly, that have survived for millennia. You are now walking along a rocky path, and you have to be careful where you step. The ground is a tapestry of sand and small stones, and you are constantly on the lookout for a flash of movement. A mainstream historical fact: scorpions and snakes were a constant threat in ancient Egypt. The desert was their home, and they were often a deadly presence in people's lives. A single bite or sting could be fatal. And without modern antivenom, a person's chances of survival were very low. The ancient Egyptians, in their usual fashion, found a way to deal with this. They had a variety of charms and amulets that were believed to protect them from these creatures, and they would often say prayers and incantations to ward off their attacks. A light joke: they basically had the original "don't tread on me" philosophy, but it was a lot more serious and a lot more literal. You see a small lizard scurry across the path, and you flinch. You're on high alert, and every rustle of the wind or movement of the sand makes you jump. You know that these creatures are out there, and they are a constant, invisible threat. A quirky fact: the ancient Egyptians had a variety of medical texts that detailed how to treat snake bites and scorpion stings. They would use a variety of remedies, including a poultice made from the blood of a goose or a specific type of mud. The effectiveness of these remedies is, of course, highly questionable, but it shows that they were constantly trying to find a way to deal with the dangers of their environment. Historians still argue whether the ancient Egyptians' fear of these creatures was a sign of a society that was constantly on the brink of panic or a healthy respect for the dangers of their world. What's clear is that they were a very real part of their lives. The gods and goddesses of ancient Egypt were often associated with these creatures. The goddess Serket, for example, was the goddess of scorpions, and she was often invoked to protect people from their stings. This is a very different kind of protection than you're used to. a reminder that your amulets and prayers are your only defense against a very real, very physical threat. You're starting to see that every single aspect of this world, from the food you eat to the path you walk on, is imbued with a sense of danger. The desert is not just a beautiful, empty landscape, it's a living, breathing thing that is filled with hidden threats. You've just had a very intense lesson in ancient Egyptian natural history, and it's a powerful and humbling experience. You're starting to see that even the smallest creatures in this world are a force to be reckoned with. You'll never look at a snake or a scorpion the same way again. The constant threat of scorpions and snakes is a chilling reminder of the raw, untamed nature of this world. But your journey is about to take a turn toward the surprisingly advanced. You are now in a room that is a stark contrast to the dusty, chaotic world outside. It's clean, organized, and filled with a variety of tools that look both familiar and strange. This is a medical workshop, and you're about to get a first-hand look at the surprisingly advanced surgical tools and medical texts of ancient Egypt. A mainstream historical fact, ancient Egyptian doctors had a surprisingly good understanding of surgery and the use of specialized tools. They had a variety of bronze scalpels, forceps, saws, and probes that were used to perform a variety of operations. They could set broken bones, stitch up wounds, and even perform trepanation, a procedure that involved drilling a hole in the skull to relieve pressure. A light joke, they basically had the original surgical suite, and it was a lot more rustic than a modern operating room. You see a surgeon at work, and he is using a set of tools that look eerily familiar. He is using a bronze scalpel to cut into a wound, and he is using a probe to clean it out. The entire process is methodical and precise, and it shows a level of skill and knowledge that you wouldn't have expected. A quirky fact, while the tools were advanced, the ancient Egyptians didn't have a modern understanding of infection or sanitation. They would often use unsterile tools and would use a variety of questionable remedies, like moldy bread, to treat infections. The mold, as we know today, contains penicillin, a powerful antibiotic, but the ancient Egyptians didn't know this. They were just using a natural remedy that they knew worked. Historians still argue whether the ancient Egyptian doctors were more of a source of genuine medical knowledge or a group of skilled technicians who were just following a set of rituals and traditions. What's clear is that they had a surprisingly good understanding of anatomy and the human body. Thanks to the mummification process, they had medical texts that detailed a variety of diseases and their treatments, and they had a very specific way of diagnosing and treating illnesses. As you stand there, watching the surgeon at work, you get a sense of a world that is not just a place of magic and superstition, but also a place of science and reason. The ancient Egyptians were a people who were constantly trying to find a way to understand the world around them, and they used their knowledge and their ingenuity to create a variety of tools and techniques that were far ahead of their time. You've just had a very intense lesson in ancient Egyptian medicine, and it's a powerful and humbling experience. You're starting to see that even in the face of a lack of modern knowledge, they were able to achieve some truly remarkable things. You'll never look at a scalpel the same way again. The sight of the surprisingly advanced medical tools is a powerful reminder that ancient Egypt was not a monolithic culture. It was a complex, layered society that was capable of both profound superstition and remarkable scientific ingenuity. Your journey now takes you back to a more familiar subject, but with a new layer of depth. You are in a small shop, and the air is thick with the scent of spices, oils, and other fragrant things. This is an ancient Egyptian perfumery, and you're about to get a first-hand look at the surprising history of their cosmetics. A mainstream historical fact, ancient Egyptians didn't just use makeup for beauty, they used it for a variety of purposes, including health, religion, and status. The most famous was kohl, the black eyeliner that was used by both men and women. It wasn't just for looks, it was also used to protect the eyes from the glare of the sun and to ward off infections. It was made from a mineral called galena, and it was ground into a fine powder and mixed with a little bit of water to create a paste. A light joke, they basically had the original all-in-one cosmetic, and it was a lot more effective than your modern mascara. You see a woman in the shop, and she is carefully applying kohl to her eyes with a small stick. She is not just painting her face, she is performing a ritual, a daily act of protection and beauty. A quirky fact, the ancient Egyptians believed that the kohl would also protect them from the evil eye, a curse that was believed to be cast by envious people. The coal was not just a cosmetic, it was a form of magic, a way to protect yourself from the unseen forces of the world. You also notice the other cosmetics in the shop. There are jars of red ochre, a mineral that was used to create a reddish pigment for the cheeks and lips. There are small bottles of scented oils and perfumes, which were made from a variety of natural ingredients, like myrrh, frankincense, and various flower petals. These were not just for fragrance, they were also a way to show off one's wealth and status. A person who smelled of expensive perfumes was clearly a person of means. Historians still argue whether the ancient Egyptians' obsession with cosmetics was more about personal vanity or about a desire to emulate their gods, who were often depicted with perfect, unblemished skin. What's clear is that the line between beauty and spirituality was completely blurred. You're starting to see that every single aspect of their lives, from their medicine to their cosmetics, was imbued with a sense of purpose and meaning. They didn't just do things for the sake of it, they did it because they believed in it. They believed in the power of a single line of coal, a single drop of perfume, a single amulet. You've just had a very intense lesson in ancient Egyptian aesthetics, and it's a powerful and humbling experience. You're starting to see that even the most mundane things in this world are a testament to a deep and abiding faith. You'll never look at a jar of makeup the same way again. The scented oils and coal pots are a beautiful, if somewhat strange, part of the ancient Egyptian world, but your journey is about to take you back to a more familiar and far more solemn topic: death. You are now in a room that is a stark contrast to the busy perfumery. It's quiet, cool, and filled with a sense of reverence. This is a mummification workshop, and you're about to get a deeper look at the intricate and time-consuming art of embalming. You saw the beginning of this process earlier, but you're now going to see the full 70-day journey. A mainstream historical fact: mummification was a long and complex process that was designed to preserve the body in a recognizable state for the soul to inhabit in the afterlife. The first step, as you saw, was the removal of the internal organs, but that was just the beginning. The body was then packed with natron salt and left to dry out for 40 days. After that, it was cleaned, rubbed with scented oils, and then carefully wrapped in hundreds of yards of linen bandages. This was a very ritualistic process, and each layer of bandage was placed with a specific purpose. A quirky fact: between the layers of bandages, embalmers would place amulets and charms that were believed to protect the body and help the soul on its journey to the afterlife. The amulets would be placed at specific points on the body, each one with a specific purpose, from protecting the heart to ensuring a safe passage through the underworld. A light joke: they basically had the original body armor, and it was a lot more spiritual than Kevlar. You see a group of embalmers at work, and they are meticulously wrapping a body. They are not just wrapping it, they are reciting incantations and prayers. And they are performing a series of rituals that are designed to help the soul on its journey. The entire process is a deep and abiding act of faith. Historians still argue whether the mummification process was a purely religious ritual or if it was also a way to show off one's wealth and status. What's clear is that it was an incredibly expensive and time-consuming process, and only the wealthy and the powerful could afford it. The average person's body was simply buried in the sand, where the dry desert heat would naturally mummify it. As you stand there, watching the embalmers at work, you get a sense of a world that was completely obsessed with death and the afterlife. They didn't just mourn the dead, they celebrated their journey, believing that they would live again. This is a very different kind of grief than you're used to, a mix of sorrow and a quiet, profound hope. You've just had a very intense lesson in ancient Egyptian funeral rites, and it's a powerful and humbling experience. You're starting to see that every single aspect of this world, from the smallest amulet to the largest pyramid, is a testament to a people who believed in a life after this one. You'll never look at a bandage the same way again. The mummification workshop, with its intricate rituals and deep sense of faith, is a powerful and sobering experience. But your journey is about to take you away from the unchanging rituals of death and toward the shifting sands of history. You are now in a very different time. A few centuries after the height of the New Kingdom, the air here is filled with a sense of unease, a feeling of an empire in decline. You see signs of political strife, foreign influences, and a loss of the old ways. The world you've come to know is slowly, inexorably, fading away. A mainstream historical fact: the New Kingdom of ancient Egypt, a period of immense power and wealth, eventually came to an end. It was followed by a period of decline, known as the Third Intermediate Period, and a series of foreign invasions. The Egyptians, who had once been the masters of their own destiny, were now at the mercy of others, the Nubians, the Assyrians, the Persians, and eventually the Greeks and Romans would all take a turn at ruling Egypt. The pharaoh was no longer the divine, all-powerful ruler he once was. He was a king, a general, and often a puppet of a foreign power. A light joke, they basically had the original regime change, and it was a lot more violent and a lot less democratic than the modern version. You see a group of soldiers in the city, but they are not the disciplined, well-organized Egyptian army you saw before. They are a mix of different cultures and ethnicities, and they speak a variety of languages. They are mercenaries, hired guns who are loyal to whoever is paying them. The temples and monuments are still there, but they are slowly falling into disrepair. The hieroglyphs are still being carved, but the art is not as detailed or as vibrant as it once was. The old traditions are slowly being replaced by new ones, and the old gods are slowly being forgotten. A quirky fact, while the empire was in decline, the Egyptian culture and religion continued to influence the world. The Greeks, for example, were fascinated by Egyptian art and religion, and they would often visit the country to study its history and its beliefs. The Romans would also adopt many Egyptian gods, and the cult of the goddess Isis, for example, would spread throughout the Roman Empire. Historians still argue whether the decline of ancient Egypt was caused by internal strife or external forces. What's clear is that it was a combination of both. The country was plagued by internal conflicts, power struggles between the priests and the pharaohs, and a series of economic problems. The foreign invasions, in turn, were a result of a weakened, divided country. You're starting to see that no empire, no matter how powerful, can last forever. The world is a constantly shifting, changing thing, and the ancient Egyptian civilization, for all its might and ingenuity, was no exception. You've just had a very intense lesson in ancient Egyptian history, and it's a powerful and humbling experience. You're starting to see that even the most beautiful and powerful civilizations have a beginning, a middle, and an end. You're now a witness to that end, and it's a powerful and slightly sad experience. You'll never look at a history book the same way again. The feeling of an empire fading is a powerful, melancholic experience. But your journey isn't ending in sorrow, it's ending with a sense of discovery. You are now in a very different time. A few thousand years after the decline of the empire, the desert is still there. But it's not a place of bustling cities and powerful pharaohs. It's a place of quiet, scholarly work. You see a group of people, dressed in modern clothes, carefully working in the sand. They are archaeologists, and they are the people who are piecing together the story of your short time here. A mainstream historical fact, much of what we know about ancient Egypt comes from the tireless work of archaeologists, historians, and other scholars. They have spent centuries excavating the sites, translating the hieroglyphs, and piecing together the story of this lost civilization. The dry desert climate has preserved a huge amount of information, from the papyrus scrolls to the mummified bodies, and it has allowed us to get a glimpse into a world that would have otherwise been lost to time. A light joke, they're basically the original detectives, but with a much longer case and a lot more sand. You watch as an archaeologist carefully brushes away sand from a small artifact. It's a small amulet, a scarab beetle, and it's almost identical to the one you bought earlier. The archaeologist is excited. She knows that this small object isn't just a piece of jewelry, it's a piece of history, a physical representation of an ancient belief. She will take it back to her lab, where she will study it, and it will help her to tell a more complete story of this civilization. A quirky fact, one of the most important discoveries in the history of archaeology was not a pyramid or a golden tomb, but a simple stone. The Rosetta Stone, which was discovered in 1799, had the same text written in 3 different scripts: hieroglyphic, demotic, and ancient Greek. It was the key that unlocked the hieroglyphs and allowed us to finally read the ancient Egyptian texts. Historians still argue whether the modern obsession with ancient Egypt is a sign of a genuine appreciation for history or a romanticized view of a lost world. What's clear is that the story of ancient Egypt has captured the imagination of people for centuries. It's a story of powerful pharaohs, mysterious gods, and a civilization that was far ahead of its time. The work of these archaeologists is a way of keeping that story alive. You're starting to see that your journey here is not just about a single civilization. It's about a conversation that has been going on for thousands of years. You are now a part of that conversation, a witness to a world that has been lost and found again. You've just had a very intense lesson in ancient Egyptian legacy, and it's a powerful and humbling experience. You're starting to see that even when a civilization dies, its story can live on. You'll never look at a history book the same way again. The work of the archaeologists, a slow, methodical unraveling of history, is a powerful reminder that the past is never truly gone, but your journey, which began with a sudden descent, is about to have its own gentle, final fade. The world of ancient Egypt, which has been so real, so visceral, is starting to feel a little bit less solid. The sounds of the archaeologists' brushes and the whispers of the past are starting to blend together, and the heat of the sun is no longer a hammer on your skull. It's a soft, comforting warmth. You look at your hands, and they are no longer covered in a fine layer of dust. The simple linen tunic you are wearing feels less like a costume and more like a memory. You can still see the pyramids in the distance, but they are no longer a monument of stone and ingenuity. They are a ghost, a whisper on the wind. The smells of the city, the spices, the sweat, and the mud bricks are no longer a part of your senses. They are a memory, a feeling, a dream. You can hear the distant sounds of a flute and a harp, and they are no longer the sounds of a banquet. They are the sounds of a lullaby, a gentle song that is lulling you into a deep and profound sleep. The world you've inhabited, with its gods, its pharaohs, its struggles, and its triumphs, is no longer a reality. It's a story. It's a journey that you have taken, and it has changed you. You have learned to see the world differently, to appreciate the simple things, and to understand that even the most powerful civilizations have a beginning and an end. You have learned that history is not just a series of dates and names, it's a living, breathing thing that is constantly being rediscovered. The journey is over now, and the world of ancient Egypt is slowly dissolving into a dream. The sun, which was once Ra, is now just a comforting light. The river, which was once the lifeblood of an empire, is now just a gentle, flowing current. The people, who were once your neighbors, your friends, and your enemies, are now just a part of the past. The gods, who were once a constant presence in your life, are now just a part of a story. You close your eyes, and you feel the last vestiges of the ancient world fade away. The heat, the dust, the noise, it's all gone. You are in a place of peace, a place of quiet, a place of rest. The journey is over, but the memories, the knowledge, and the feeling of a world that was once so real will stay with you forever. Now, let's ease into a gentle wind down. The journey is complete, and the final grains of sand have settled. The whispers of pharaohs and the echoes of ancient streets are fading into the background hum of your own quiet space. The stories have been told, the mysteries unveiled, and the sun has set on our time in ancient Egypt. As the final images drift away, you can let your mind be still. A calm pool reflecting the starlight. There's nothing left to do, nowhere left to be. Just the soft rhythm of your breath and the profound stillness of the night. Sleep now, and let the rest of the world be still with you. The past will be waiting. But for now, it's time to let go. End of script. Sweet dreams.